So you're applying to med school right now and you need some advice. Well, you've come to the right place. As someone who went through this incredibly enjoyable process just about a year ago and got into a couple schools,
but also got rejected by a couple schools,
there is a lot I wish I knew about this process before I started it. My name is Arvind, and in this video, I'm gonna share some tips and tricks to help you get through your application cycle and avoid some of the mistakes that I made. Oh, and stick around to the end for a trick that'll make life a lot easier later in your application cycle. All right, so the first tip is to stay organized and document your plan to complete every part of the medical school application process. So there are 7 parts you should write a plan down for. I'm not gonna go over each one of them now, but I will do future videos on them. But I wanna take some time to highlight the ones that are time sensitive and the ones that people sometimes forget about. First, submitting your transcripts early is super important. I've had friends who had their applications delayed almost a whole month because they had some issues with their transcripts. So as soon as you have your spring semester grades posted, just go ahead and submit your transcripts, because the earlier you submit, the quicker you can get them in, and that way you can submit as early as possible, which would be late May or early June. In terms of your letters of recommendation, you want to ask those as early as possible, even the year before if you can. Professors have a ton of letter of recommendations to write, so the sooner you ask, the quicker you're going to get it and the higher quality it's going to be as well. One thing that threw me off is the committee letter. So certain universities do a committee letter for applying to medical school. So if your undergraduate university offers a committee letter, it's recommended that you get it done because most med schools prefer it. So in that case, just check with your pre-med advisor to see what the procedure and timeline is so you're ready for that. Tip number 2, use free online resources to make your application as strong as possible. This video isn't sponsored, but I personally binge watched all the Shimasi and Consulting videos on med school admissions because they're just so high quality, and they also have blog posts on their website that are also really high quality with really good examples. There are also really cool medical students here on YouTube that have posted their whole AMCAS applications with advice on how to fill it out and all that. On a side note, you should subscribe so you can stay tuned for when I post my complete AMCAS application. Also, find some trustworthy people to review the things that you write. While this could be other pre-meds that are also going through the cycle, I recommend asking medical students or professors that have a lot more experience in it. Also, it's nice to have a lot of people that can review your stuff, because throughout the process, you're going to be writing a lot. Your personal statement, your work and activities, your secondaries. So if you have maybe 3 people reviewing your personal statement, just have those people do that, and then you can ask a different set of people to review your secondaries and different people to review your work and activity section, just so you're not asking too much of anyone. And if you don't know anyone to ask, there are a lot of people online that are more than willing to do so. A lot of doctors that are trying to build their presence on social media too love helping pre-med students. So if you find anyone on Instagram or something like that, a lot of times they'll help you out. So tip number 3 can be summarized in this phrase: striving for perfection can be dangerous. Let me tell you a story to illustrate this point. The winter break before my application cycle, I told myself that I was gonna crank out a draft of my personal statement. That would give me over 6 months to refine it and make it really good. But every time I sat down to write something, I type a little bit and then backspace it all. I felt like everything that I wrote was just so cringe and generic. And so I emerged from that winter break having watched hours of YouTube, completed an entire Pokemon game, but still draftless. Fast forward to April actually, and I'm still draftless. I've been so caught up on writing a perfect first draft that I hadn't even written anything down for like 6 months. Come on. And here's the first takeaway that you really need to grasp. The first draft of your personal statement is gonna suck. I know mine did. But hey, at the end of the day, at least you have something written down that you can then get feedback on and build upon. Tip number 4 might sound like the opposite of tip number 3, but it is that quality is still more important than urgency. So as you know, you can submit your medical school application beginning in the end of May. And everyone typically recommends submitting your application as soon as possible to maximize your chances of getting in. I also wanted to submit my application as soon as possible, but just a few days before the application opened up, I had a crisis. The personal statement that I was working on for the past month, I just didn't like it as much anymore. So I decided to rewrite my personal statement from the top 3 days before the application opened up. I was freaking out. In my mind, I was thinking, did I want to get my application submitted as soon as I could, meaning I would have to finish my personal statement and get it reviewed in 3 days? Or did I want to sacrifice a little bit of urgency for a lot more quality? While the answer is clear now, at the moment, it seemed like I was balancing the life and death of my application. But I made the right decision, and I decided to take another week on my personal statement. I got my advisors to review it, I refined it, and everyone agreed that it was a lot better than my previous one. Now, while I technically wasn't submitting on day one, the improvements I made on my application were well worth the slight delay that I had in submitting it. So that's the takeaway. Make sure you take the time to improve it to the quality where you'd like it to be. And don't just rush it because you think you need to be as early as possible. The reality is, as long as you submit in June or maybe early July, your chances of getting in won't be hurt. I mean, medical schools only really start interviewing in August at the earliest. So tip number 5 is to really take time to make your school application list. First, I recommend applying to all your in-state medical schools because you have the highest chances of getting in at those schools. Then start looking at other factors. Do you see yourself living in a certain area? Are you interested in doing a lot of research? In that case, you might want to look at a school that integrates research into their curriculum. Are you interested in primary care? Then you might look at a school that has a lot of clinical exposure early on. It's also important to be realistic. Are your MCAT and GPA not exactly where you'd like it to be? That's fine, but make sure that you don't just apply to schools outside of your target stats. I recommend buying an MSAR subscription from the AAMC so you can see the complete data of average MCAT scores and GPAs and other stats of each particular school. It's also important to remember that after you submit your primary applications, you'll have to submit secondary applications to all those schools that have additional essay questions. For example, I had initially applied to the Virginia Tech School of Medicine because my stats were close to the average, but when I saw that their secondary application essay was 4 500-word essays that were particular to the school itself, and that the matriculating class was only 50 students, I decided it wasn't worth the effort. Now, if I had looked up the secondary essay prompts from previous years before I applied to that school, I wouldn't have unnecessarily applied and I would have saved the money. All right, so before I reveal the bonus tip, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this far into the video, and if any of this has helped so far, make sure to drop a comment below on what helped you the most. So here's the bonus tip. Secondary essays are sneaky, but there's a little trick. I still remember as soon as my application got verified by the AAMC, within a couple hours I was spammed by all these schools with their secondary applications. Typically, to maximize the chances of you getting an interview from your secondary application, it's recommended that you submit that secondary application 2 weeks at most from when you received it. And now when you received all of them in a matter of a couple of hours, all of a sudden you have a bunch of essays you have only 2 weeks to write. And that's a mistake I made. After I submitted my primary application, I kind of tuned out medical school applications. What's recommended that you do is pre-write your essays. So within that time of you submitting your primary application and then actually receiving the secondaries, you write the essays based on the school's prior essay prompts, which you can find online. Now here's the trick. Duke Medical School has a total of 8 essay prompts that are 500 words each. Now, regardless of whether or not you choose to apply to Duke School of Medicine, if you have 8 500-word essays that answer all these prompts, that's going to answer about 75% of all the other secondary essays that you'll probably have to write. So if you pre-write all of Duke's secondary essays before you get your secondary applications, you'll only have about 25% of all your secondary essays left to write when you finally start getting them. And so you'll be able to get through them way faster and life will be a lot less stressful. Give that a shot and let me know what you think about it. I hope those tips helped, and consider subscribing if you want more medical school tips, as well as videos about my journey through med school. Peace.